Therapy Chat Podcast, episode 147.
This is the Therapy Chat Podcast with Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C.
Hey everybody, it's Laura Reagan, wanting to let you know that if you are interested in doing a deep dive into the Daring Way work, which is based on the research of Brené Brown on authenticity, vulnerability, courage, trust, and connection and relationships, you can join Charlotte Heiler-Easley and I in Lexington, Kentucky on October 5th and 6th for a 2-day retreat intensive combining the Daring Way with Charlotte's work, relational equine assisted learning. Yes, you heard that right. We are doing a 2-day retreat combining the Daring Way with working on trust and connection, boundaries, vulnerability, and authenticity through work with horses. It's an unbeatable combination. We had an amazing experience last November 2017 when we did 2 one-day retreats, and we wanted to expand to offer 2 days because we can go deeper in 2 days, and everybody loved the 1 day so much. So join us in Lexington, Kentucky, October 5th and 6th. Best pricing ends on August 1st, but we still have discounted rates available after that as well. And to register and get all the details, go to laurareaganlcswc.com/retreat. If you want to understand more about why we are doing these retreats and what you can expect to gain from them, listen to episodes 55, 56, 123, 133, and 139. I talked with Charlotte twice in episodes 56, 133, and which was a replay, and 139. And I talked with Julia Alexander, who is another therapist using work with equines in trauma-focused therapy in 123. And in episode 55, I talked about my own experience the first time I connected with myself in deep connection with a horse and how it was really a powerful experience that changed everything for me. It's been 2 years. It's still just as memorable and just as poignant for me. And I want to share that experience with you. So if you want to join us, you can go to laurareaganlcswc.com/retreat, get all the information. There's a payment plan, and I hope we'll see you there. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. Today's episode is a replay of my interview with Desmond, who is a psychotherapist, mindfulness teacher, and a Zen student of Thich, Nhat, Hahn, who talks with us about having self-compassion during difficult times. I think we often forget that self-compassion is it's not about making everything around you be okay. It's about helping yourself to be okay with not being okay, no matter what's happening around you. So while I'm on vacation, please enjoy this interview with Ambrose, Desmond. And coming up when I return from my break in September, I've got some awesome interviews for you. I recently spoke with Natalie Feinblatt for the second time, and we're going to go deeper into talking about cults. Also, I had a second discussion with Nhat about trauma-informed psychotherapy practice and trauma-informed yoga, and basically what it means to be trauma-informed. And today, I interviewed the incredible Susan Pease Bannett, the author of The Trauma Toolkit and the new book, Wisdom, Attachment, and Love in Trauma Therapy, Beyond Evidence-Based Practice. I know you're going to love that one. So sit back, enjoy, and as always, thanks for listening to Therapy Chat. Therapy Chat podcast wouldn't exist without the support of its listeners. If you'd like to become a member, please go to patreon.com/therapychat. By making a $1 per month donation, you can help Therapy Chat keep going over the long haul. Thank you for your support. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. Today, I'm very excited to have a returning guest, someone who teaches, speaks, and practices in self-compassion, a subject that I'm very passionate about. So today, my returning guest is Tim Desmond. Tim, thank you so much for coming back to Therapy Chat today.
Really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy too that you could come back, and you have a new book out, which caught my attention and made me want to ask you to come back. You're the author of the new book, the Self-Compassion Skills Workbook, and the previous book that I love, Self-Compassion and Psychotherapy, Mindfulness-Based Practices for Healing and Transformation. So, Tim, can you just tell our audience more about yourself and the work you do?
Sure. Really broadly speaking, I guess, like a lot of people, like probably a lot of your listeners, I'm somebody who really wishes that we lived in a better world, like in the sense of whatever I'm doing, whether it's psychotherapy or activism or teaching meditation, so much of what I'm doing comes from this feeling of like just not wanting suffering for myself, not wanting suffering for other people, just like the kind of sense of like I'm wanting the world to be a better place. And that's been a big part of my life. I mean, we all get into this work because we're looking for something, right? And so that's been a big part of my life since I was young. I mentioned to you before when I was on last time, I had a pretty hard time growing up. I grew up in Boston with a single alcoholic mother. We were always struggling financially, and we were homeless for a little while. And basically, I just remember like this desire for the world to be a better place it's not really altruistic in any sense, that it comes from this desire that goes back as far as I can remember, of just wishing people weren't so mean, wishing that I lived in a better world, wishing sort of people were nicer to me and people like me, and really identifying with people who are suffering a lot and who are kind of victims of oppression and in every way. And whatever I'm doing, whether it's teaching mindfulness to activists or teaching mindfulness to therapists, it comes from this feeling of just wanting the world to be better. The funny thing about that motivation is that it leads you pretty quickly into kind of a paradox, which is sort of like the paradox of like if somebody says like, relax or I'll kill you, right? What happens is if I'm feeling like, I want this world to be a better place, I want my life to be better, I want to be a better person, as soon as we identify this problem that we want to change, what we do kind of inevitably is we turn that problem into our enemy. And so whether it's like whether I'm trying to change something in society or whether I'm trying to change, critical or judgmental thoughts in me, as soon as I turn, let's say that kind of self-critical voice in me, as soon as I turn it into an enemy, well, we all know the best way to treat an enemy is to hate them and kill them, right? So as soon as we turn this any part of me or any part of the world into an enemy, what happens is that we deepen the level of conflict and violence, and just that kind of radical non-acceptance of the world or of my life is really the seed of so many of these problems that we want to change, is really the seed of that judgmental thinking or that self-criticism. As soon as we say that self-criticism isn't okay, right? That self-critical voice in me is bad and I really want it to go away. And that's my goal. That's my New Year's resolution. I want to stop being self-critical. We turn that part of ourselves into an enemy, and then everything that we do kind of deepens that divide. And so this is really what's led me to self-compassion. I've been a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk and teacher, for a long time. And the thing that I really keep learning from him and keep being challenged by is I'm the type of person that I have this tendency to look for what I want to change in myself, look for what I want to change in the world. And as soon as I name it, it's sort of like, okay, it's like that, whatever that thing is the problem, is the enemy. And what I keep learning from Thich Nhat Hanh is that just that way of thinking perpetuates a lot of the suffering that I'm hoping to overcome. And so instead, what's led me to self-compassion, to sort of the path of self-compassion, is learning that instead of viewing these things as a problem that needs to be vanquished or whatever, an enemy, recognizing that these are manifestations of suffering, and the way to respond to suffering is with care and compassion, is with embracing and wanting to help. And that's just kind of constantly, as much as I teach this and as much as I practice it, it's constantly a challenge that this I'll find something in myself, and I keep going back to the sense of like, okay, that's the problem. That's what I need to get rid of. And I keep needing to be reminded over and over again of, no, that is suffering in you, and what suffering needs is care and compassion. So I don't know if I answered your question. That's the way that I think about my work, is just kind of from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that what you said is a great answer to my question, better than probably what I directly asked, because I think, it's so hard to keep in mind that feeling better doesn't mean we have to eliminate the emotions that we don't like feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet it's like, I don't know about you, but that's immediately where my mind goes. Like as soon as I recognize that there's something about my experience that I don't like, there's something that's not working for me, then immediately it's just sort of like, oh, that's the problem. That's the thing that I want to overcome. And it always takes this like extra step of, it's not the problem. It's a part of you that needs some love and compassion.
Yeah. And I think in our culture, in our world, I guess, it really seems that when we have things we don't like about ourselves, we want to change them and make them not be there. So to give ourselves compassion, love, and care, to give those parts, love, care, compassion, is pretty counterintuitive.
Yeah. Well, lately I've been thinking about my mind a lot as kind of like a friend who likes to give a lot of advice and opinions that are mainly unsolicited. Like if you imagine that you had a friend that was just like literally, that just always was hanging out with you and always was giving you advice and opinions, that's how I relate to my mind. And sometimes those opinions are helpful. So the thing that's really clear to me is this really opinionated friend loves me and is trying to help, and sometimes their advice is good. A lot of times it's terrible, but they're not my enemy, right? Just because they won't shut up because they care about me. And they're giving me their best advice. And so with a friend like that, and this is definitely true for my mind, sometimes my mind can sort of give me an opinion or give me some advice, and I can just say, no thanks. And my mind will just be like, okay. I can just be like, let it go, come back. That's not necessarily true. But a lot of the time, my mind will give me some kind of an opinion or some advice, and I'll say no thanks, and it'll say, no, you don't understand. This is really important. I need you to, you really have to agree with me, or you really have to do this. And that's the time that I have to remember that just like a friend who's doing that, if I empathize with them and I say, I see that you're trying to help and I appreciate you, and I see that really seems true for you right now, and I just want, I get that you're really trying to help me, then my friend can kind of calm down a little. If I try to argue with them, or if I try to just ignore them, it doesn't make the situation better. It doesn't lead to, they get louder, there's just it certainly doesn't lead to the harmony that I'm looking for, or the sense of sort of peacefulness and spaciousness that I'm looking for. And so my really opinionated friend is, will just sort of point at something and be like, look, that's the problem. That's the thing that's ruining your life. And I need to, rather than just be like, yeah, you're right, I need to remember to kind of say, okay, I can tell you really want me to, you want to help. You want me to have more peace and spaciousness and well-being in my life, and that's why you're trying to do this. You're really trying to look out for me, and thank you for that. And I see that that's your opinion right now, but I want to do a little more inquiry before I decide whether to agree with you or not. It's definitely easier to do that than to do the thing that we usually do, which is just sort of argue.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe the hard part is even seeing your mind as that opinionated friend rather than just reacting to what your mind says is the problem, without even that pause.
Yeah, well, to do that is really hard. I mean, it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of training. The more that I think about mindfulness and self-compassion, the more I like to think about them as training your mind. Like when you bring a puppy home, the puppy is untrained. And if you don't train that puppy, they're going to ruin your carpet. And an untrained mind is going to ruin a lot more than your carpet. Like if we don't train our minds to be able to not just run wild with worries and judgments and all the places that they go, if we don't train them, then yeah, they're just pretty out of control. But like a puppy, if we have a lot of patience and gentleness and consistency and positive feedback, then it's possible to train our minds. And yeah, it's really the product of that training where you start to see the fruits of the practice. It's that practicing over and over and over again to the point that in the really hard moments of life, you can remember to practice. And that doesn't happen naturally. That's when life is really hard, that's the last time that most of us remember to come back to the present moment, to come back to our bodies, to be kind to ourselves. And what it takes is training ourselves in those qualities over and over and over again, in the same way that you'd sort of train yourself in any kind of skill like self-defense. If you want to learn self-defense, you train yourself you kind of drill yourself over and over and over again to the point that it starts to feel automatic. And it's really only then that you can use it when you need it.
Right. Because in that situation, if it's a self-defense thing, your automatic response would be, like fight or flight or whatever. So you have to have this be as much of an automatic response as that.
There's a Greek kind of military poet that wrote a line that I always think about when talking about training your mind. And the line is, we don't rise to the level of our aspirations, we fall to the level of our training. And what that means is that in a moment of crisis, that's not the time that we think of something new. In a moment of crisis, that is, all we have access to. And cognitive science has really demonstrated this pretty clearly. All we have access to is what we've trained ourselves in enough that our automatic pilot consciousness can do it. That if we can do it with no conscious control, but just on automatic pilot, only then do we have access to it in a moment of crisis. It's amazing if we can train ourselves in therapy. When I'm working with clients, one of the things that I really try to help people to do is to use their own symptoms, to use their own distress as a bell of mindfulness. If you go to Plum Village, where Thich Nhat Hanh lives, there's all these bells that you'll hear, and every time there's a bell, everybody stops and takes 3 breaths. So that people, anybody who's walking will stop, or conversations will stop, and people who are chopping vegetables will stop. And it's not like stopping like freeze tag,
That's what I
hearing.
pictured.
Yeah, no, hearing the bell, it's like stopping, like, what's going on? Why am I here? What do I need to be happy right now? And connecting with why am I, like asking the question, why am I doing what I'm doing right now? Like really coming back to what's alive in you. And actually, that's probably one of the most dangerous, what in Buddhism we call near enemies of mindfulness. One of the most dangerous, maybe we could say like imposters of mindfulness, is the kind of mindfulness that turns you into a mindfulness zombie. The kind of mindfulness that actually makes you a little bit more dead, or a little bit like, it's sort of like you're just going through the motions. So you're smiling and slowing down, but you're doing it by actually kind of dissociating from what's really alive in you. And that is not the practice that Thich Nhat Hanh teaches. The practice of mindfulness is really about becoming more in touch with life, becoming more in touch with what's alive in you. And so this kind of a bell, hearing this bell and stopping, is not about stopping and sort of dissociating from what you were just doing. It's a bell of stopping and saying, wait, what's really alive right now? And so I want to teach clients that when you notice that anxiety start building up in your chest, when you notice yourself kind of having these, ruminative thoughts, that's a bell to stop and come back to this moment and get in touch with what's really alive in you right now. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest problems with the way that mindfulness is sometimes taught, is that it can be interpreted as something that is the opposite of what it's supposed to be, in the sense that it's something that sort of deadens you a little bit. But really mindfulness is transformative. Mindfulness is beautiful. Mindfulness is worth practicing when it's something that makes you more alive, makes you more deeply in touch with life.
Wow. I'm going to have to think about that one a lot. I'm thinking one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and I think it relates to this, but feel free to correct me, is
Sure.
An article that you recently published in Mindful magazine, or mindful.org. And you described a situation where you were feeling a lot of intense emotion, and you were able to use mindfulness not to escape from the situation, but to bring you more into the present moment and into what was actually happening then.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you mean, or is that a different?
That's definitely what I mean. And just for your listeners, I wrote an article recently about something that I've been going through in my life for the past few years. In 2015, just after our son turned 2, my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And in the past couple years since that diagnosis, we've been through multiple surgeries and chemotherapy and recurrences and more surgeries and more chemotherapy. And we're continuing, we're in the middle of that journey right now. Actually, as we record this, we have new scans and then chemotherapy, I think 3 days from now. And what I was writing about was an experience that I had, maybe our last rounds of scans. So one of the things that's been really hardest for me in this whole journey has been when my wife has a set of scans, she'll go through and have the scans done, and then either later that day or much more often the next day, we meet with our doctor and hear the results. And right now, we're in a place where any set of scans could be news that's basically our lives are going to be radically changed from this point forward. And so when we'll sit in the waiting room, and then we'll go into the doctor's office, and then sitting in the doctor's office, it seems like we're always just sitting there for at least like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, waiting for the doctor to come. And there'll be people walking up and down the hallway, and every set of footsteps that we hear, it's like, is that the doctor? Are we going to hear now? And that's one of the hardest times for me. And my wife and I always meditate during that time. And the story that I told was about a last set of scans we went through. We were sitting and meditating together in the doctor's office, waiting for the doctor to come in. And I was aware of this really intense block of aversion in me. This incredibly strong feeling of I don't want this. I don't want reality to be what it is right now. Like, just kind of, this is unacceptable. And I think we can all relate to feeling that in different contexts. And luckily, because of my practice, I was able to say to myself, okay, stay with this feeling, come back to your body. And coming back to the sensations in my body and just allowing that feeling to be there without trying to change it at all, it calmed enough that I was able to see into it, able to sort of ask the question, okay, so what is it about this moment that is so painful? And kind of obvious answer came up, which is, I don't want to lose my wife. And I, again, just slowed down, sat with that reality, that incredibly strong, what we sometimes call mental formation, thought in me, and just allowed myself to sit with it rather than reacting to it. I don't want to lose her. I just kind of let myself say that and feel it. I don't want to lose her. I don't want to lose her. And as I was saying that, I looked down and I'm seeing I'm holding her hand right now. There she is. She's alive right now. And what I saw in that moment is that all of that suffering in me, the root of it was the awareness of how precious her life is to me. And there she is, alive right next to me right now. And then it just seemed so ludicrous that I would be doing anything other than celebrating the fact that we're together. It just seemed ridiculous. But here we are. Like, why is this a moment of grieving? This is a moment that she is alive now, here together. And that's the freedom that comes from when we can be in touch with the present moment. When we can actually see what's here in front of us. And the insight that came for me in that experience was that I've heard Thich Nhat Hanh say so many times that our suffering and our joy are not separate. They're made out of the same stuff. But this was definitely like the deepest and clearest that I've experienced that, which is the root of all of that pain that I was feeling. It's like it was made, the energy that it was made out of is, my wife is so precious to me. And just that, cherishing that connection, looked at from one perspective, creates this tremendous suffering, but then the very same energy can give rise to this experience of like joy and celebration and gratitude more than anything. And so one of the main metaphors that Thich Nhat Hanh uses when he talks about self-compassion and the transformation of suffering and healing is turning garbage into compost and compost into flowers, which is basically like life gives you garbage, but you've learned how to turn garbage into compost and compost into flowers. And the thing that I love about that analogy is that it's not that life gives you garbage and you know how to just not think about the garbage too much or how to get rid of the garbage. But no, you know how to turn that same garbage into something beautiful. That's actually a possibility with mindfulness and compassion practices. And this is definitely that experience that I wrote about is definitely a really clear experience for me of what that means, of just that the suffering itself is not separate from gratitude.
Thank you for sharing that beautiful
story.
And I mean, I was really moved by it. And I know that it probably has already helped many people and hopefully people who are listening who may be dealing with some kind of situation that seems impossible can take away a little hope out of that too. Because I thought that was very hopeful.
Thanks.
So I want to ask you about the two books, the Self-Compassion and Psychotherapy and the Self-Compassion Skills Workbook. Are they intended to be used together? Do they complement one another, or are they fully separate?
I think they can be used together. I think Self-Compassion and Psychotherapy is really a book for primarily for therapists or people who are wanting to go pretty deep into thinking about the relationship between suffering, compassion, and healing. And so what I tried to do there is offer everything that I've come to believe and experience about how compassion can be used to heal suffering in our personal practice and especially in psychotherapy. The workbook is intended for everybody. Mm-hmm. The workbook can be used by therapists with their clients, can be used by clients on their own. It's the format of the workbook is based on some research by Richie Davidson, where he's been looking for a while sort of what is the minimum dose. People ask him all the time, well, what is the minimum dose of meditation training that is going to lead to real changes? And after a lot of experiments, he's come to believe that 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks of compassion training leads to measurable changes in both behavior and brain physiology. So if we can do 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks, that's generally would be considered sort of like the minimum dose where we can expect behavioral and physiological changes. So I set up the workbook as a way of guiding someone's practice, sort of a 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks kind of practice. And the way that the workbook is set up is different practices are helpful for different people. And I've seen a lot of attempts by meditation teachers to try to individualize meditation practices for people, because we're aware that it's really true. Like some people respond to this kind of practice, some people respond to that kind of practice. For some people on a day-to-day basis, different things are going to feel helpful. But generally when people do that, it's been these kinds of practices if you're depressed, these kinds of practices for perfectionism, these kinds of practices for anxiety. And that's certainly not how Thich Nhat Hanh teaches. And that really hasn't been my experience of what's most effective for people. My experience of what's most effective for people is you sort of start with a body scan, and depending on what comes up, it might be this practice or that practice. And so I divided the core self-compassion practices into 8 core practices that have like a few variants of each, divided them into 8 core practices, and created what I call the map to self-compassion, which is basically a flow chart. So you begin by doing a body scan, and then depending on what comes up in your body scan, you look at this kind of flow chart, and it says, in your first body scan, it says, do you notice any distress or any suffering that comes up? Yes or no? The suffering or distress that's coming up, do you find, is it overwhelmingly strong, or can you tolerate it? Yes or no? And depending on your answers to those questions, it will point you at different practices and kind of move you from one practice to the next, depending on what comes up for you in that particular session of practicing. And probably the thing that I'm most proud of, the thing that I was hoping the most, I got a review on Amazon.com of someone who was using the workbook as kind of as sort of like an amendment, or using the workbook as a complementary treatment in working with complex trauma. Like she was actually able to use this workbook, to use the practices that were here, and be able to practice self-compassion with complex trauma, being supervised by a therapist, but also on her own. And that was really what I was hoping for, because a lot of self-help tools, especially sort of mindfulness-based self-help tools, the way that they're presented, they don't have sort of the adequate depth, a lot of them, for use with really deep issues, with complex trauma and dissociation. And what I was really hoping with this workbook is to create something that would be usable for people even with really intense suffering. And the feedback that I'm getting is that it actually does work. So you can check it out either through Norton, the publisher, or on Amazon. And I think on Norton, they'll let you kind of download a free exercise and kind of take a look at it. But yeah, I'm really happy with how it's come out.
Yeah, it's I love the map, and what you said about complex trauma is music to my ears, because I was looking at the map and I was saying, I know some clients who have DID or some very severe dissociation who this kind of map is like, and it does look like a flow chart, and there's a little tear out small version of it in the book, which I'm looking at right now. It's perfect because I think it even taps into that resource of the cognition to be able to say, here, what do I do next? What do I do next? And
brings you back into the room.
Yeah, I think that I'm very eager to use this with some of my clients who, it may just be a little too broad to just try practicing self-compassion without some kind of guideline. If this happens and what to do if that happens. So I really love this.
Yeah. And then with the workbook, I also recorded all of the guided practices. And and so when you buy the workbook, there's a link that comes with it where you can either stream or download all of the practices. So it's kind of a similar, you can, rather than having to read them, you can also listen to them.
That's great. I got to find that link in there because I saw some little icons of like
Yeah.
an audio thing. And I was like, oh, are these recorded? Obviously, I haven't had a chance to read the whole book because I just got it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, I think this is an amazing resource, and I'm sure it's going to be helping so many people. I know I'll be using it with my clients and recommending people to order it. So I know we're getting short on time, and I don't want to hold you up, but do you have a minute just to tell people about where to find all the things you're doing? Because I know you have more than your books.
Sure. Yeah. So my books, you can find my books anywhere that books are sold. On my website, timdesmond.net, you can find an online video training in self-compassion. It's self-paced. There's 12 weeks of content, but you can actually do it, take as long or short as you want. And there's a free trial. So if you go to timdesmond.net and look for the online video training, people can find that. I have some advanced trainings for therapists in the Boston area coming up. So if you go to timdesmond.net, you can see we'll be in Cambridge, Newton, and Salem, Massachusetts, September, I believe it's 18th, 19th, and 20th. And then, and we still have openings, and you can sign up online. And yeah, that's and any other. I'll be in the Denver area in I think November, and you can again find that on my website, timdesmond.net.
Right, and you also have a community that you co-founded, right?
Yeah. So this week we're actually having our all ages kind of family retreat at Morning Sun Mindfulness Center. So the website there is morningsuncommunity.org. And it's a retreat center and co-housing community in the tradition of Thich, Nhat, Hahn. And so if you're interested in practicing or attending our retreats or just want to learn more about our community, you can find it at morningsuncommunity.org. It's a really wonderful place in southwestern New Hampshire, near Keene, New Hampshire, right outside of Antioch University.
Awesome. Well, I will put a link to both websites in the show notes in case anybody who's listening didn't get a chance to jot them down. And I just want to thank you so much for coming back to Therapy Chat today. I just loved this conversation, and I'm really grateful for the work you're doing.
Well, thanks. It was great to talk with you.
Just another reminder that if you'd like to become a member of Therapy Chat, supporting the podcast while receiving fun member perks and being able to communicate with me one-on-one, go to patreon.com/therapychat. If every subscriber donated just $1 per month, Therapy Chat would be able to keep going strong indefinitely. Thanks so much for your support.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.